Yeah.
I think you have to go back for it to.
Yeah, you'll have to go further back and people won't be able to sit. So, yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Alternative Law Forum. I'm Manvi. I'm a lawyer and researcher with ALF. And ALF is an alternative lawyering space which integrates both litigation and research and some components of advocacy. And every Friday, we do a Friday forum discussion, which is to talk about issues of social justice from both perspectives of academia and also action and movement-based work. And this week, we have with us Sumanto Mondal, who is an independent writer and researcher, and who will be speaking to us specifically about caste lines in Bengaluru, settled outside the pecking order. And he'll be presenting to us, which is previously an exhibit, but this will be a presentation which he'll be speaking to us about. And with that, I will hand it over to Sumanto, who will take us through the talk. We'll be following up with a question and answer session. And
offline first and then online.
Yes, offline first and online then. So those of you who are online, you can leave questions on the chat box or wait till the end of the presentation to come in and ask questions live. Yeah, over to you, Sumanto.
Thanks. I hope I'm audible. If I'm not, please let us know in the chat box. Thank you all for coming in. There's more people here than I expected. And I'm not sure how many people are online, but welcome to the presentation. Firstly, thank you so much for ALF for having me here. As you were just told, this was part of a project submitted to the Smarter Digital Realities residency, which was supported by the Gotha Institute and Sandbox Collective in Bangalore. The world famous Padmini Ray Mare was the curator, and I'm so happy that she gave me this opportunity. So the presentation Caste Lines in Bengaluru was conceived as part of the Smarter Digital Realities residency, as I told you. But originally it was a sort of suspicion, you could call it, or an observation that I had growing up in the city, because I grew up close to a declared slum in Jeevan Bhima Nagar. And today we talk about flooding as if it's a new phenomenon in Bangalore. So that's one of the elements I'm going to be covering as well. But primarily, this presentation is meant to give you some kind of a base in data to prove that we still fit the medieval layout as we see it back in the day. As we've been seeing from ancient times with our so-called 3,000-year-old culture. And there are many writers in the past, sociologists, who have analyzed how lowered caste communities are settled. And we all know about how they are part of the periphery. But my suspicion in Bangalore's case was the fact that it also followed, that kind of hierarchy was also in the topography. And this project basically combines 2011 census data, specifically the slum extracts from Bangalore. And as what you can see on your screen is basically me plotting all these areas. A little bit about the 2011 census. I hope you're able to see this clearly. As you can see, these are the fields which come in, wherein, mind you, this is just the slum abstract, which means these are the, like I was saying, these are the fields. A lot of the slums, as you can see, are owned by the government themselves. A lot of slums are private owned as well. What we call slumlords globally own a lot of slums in Bangalore as well. The railways own a few slums. The BBMP owns a few slums, right? There are quite a lot of other private and public owners of slums in Bangalore. Now, I'd like you to look at there's a little bit of a lag, so I'm just going to look at my screen. As you can see, I was talking about the ownership. There's also the extent, the size of every slum, and these are in acres. The survey number stage is not exactly required. The notification date is also an important vertical because this is when these slums were declared. Now, let me tell you, there are three categories of slums in Bangalore: declared slums, undeclared slums, and CMC slums, which is the City Municipal Corporation slums. Could you please switch off your phones, please, or put them on silent? Thanks. So I have specifically focused on the declared slums for a couple of reasons, primarily because they are some of the oldest slums recognized in the city. Also, they have the strongest, or rather the clearest data sets. If I can, actually, this is the, I hope you're able to see this. Yeah. So as you can see, this is how it's actually presented. And once we get, you guys can check this out later, but the part I want you guys to focus on is the number of huts, the population, sorry. They break it up as the number of huts in each slum. As you would notice, there is Gandhinagar slums. Within them, these are the sub-slums, right? And they break up the number into huts, total number of huts, the total population, right? Number of male, number of female, SC, ST, and others. Now, I'm sure you've all heard that the OBC numbers have been held back. No. Taking a second. I'm sure all of you know or probably have heard, and if you haven't heard, the other backward caste data has not been released. So this is just the data of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Now, just keep this in mind that they give us the total population here, the SC population in each slum, the ST population in each slum, and the others. Now, these others could include a lot of categories. Yeah, that's my dad, guys. So I can't say anything. Sorry, people online. My dad's disrupting this whole thing. No, right here. Must be something to do with his allegiance with the Congress, the ones who originally are holding back that data. So coming back, the OBC data has been held back, so we're not going to make observations on that yet. But the others could include Dalits, SC/STs who are former SC/STs who are now probably Muslim, Christian, or unidentified, and they aren't counted. Just so that you know, for the benefit of, I'm sure people in this room, most of you know, for the benefit of people tuning in, SC/STs will be only identified as SC/ST in the census if they identify as Hindu, which is one of the biggest ironies of the situation, because until independence, until the laws were laid down, the SC/ST OBCs were actually external. They were not considered as Hindu at all, right? So this is one of the data sets that, this is the reference data set, like I said, and I've only focused on Bangalore urban declared slums, as you can see down here. There's also the undeclared slums. As you can see, the data set is not as clean and broken up. The CMC slums are even worse in terms of their data representation. So I'm going to come back to this. Now, using this, a lot of the slums were actually not traceable. But coming back to my presentation, this is how I plotted the slums in Bangalore. Right, the red areas that you see are some of the most elite parts of Bangalore. As you can see, this is Rajajinagar, right? This is Malleshwaram. This is high grounds. So I'm going to quickly, I'm going to keep coming back to this, but I want to also quickly tell you what sets my research apart from what's been done so far. Most of the research so far has taken the same data set, but they've looked at the problem horizontally. And they have looked at the spread, the location, and the positioning. But during the course of my research, I found something that actually changed the entire game. This is a heat map of topography. If I hope you can see this. This basically tells you the elevation, right? So the blues are the low elevation areas, the whites and the reds are the high elevation areas. So as I keep zooming in, notice that the scale on the right changes, right? So this is Bangalore. Now, for those who didn't get that, the whites and the reds are some of the highest lying areas in Bangalore. Now, when I'm outside, when I'm looking from a distance of 3 kilometers above right now, it all looks like, you know, the entire Bangalore is on high ground. And just so you know, Bangalore is 920 meters above sea level, which is very unique for any of the mega cities in India, right? And this is what actually creates the hypothesis that I'm trying to establish. Now, if you notice, there are, as I keep going in, give it a second to load, you start seeing the actual difference between the topography, wherein you have high grounds here, which is at 920 meters, but Kempapura Agrahara, which is probably 2 kilometers away, is almost 60 meters below at 870 meters, right? And this is the Bangalore layout as a whole. If you look at it, I hope this is visible to you on the ones who are attending online. If you're not able to, please leave us a comment in the chat. Right? So just to familiarize you with this, right? So now I'm going to shift. Right. So we'll be sharing the link to this interactive presentation after this presentation. You can go down to the table of contents. The first slide tells you how to view this, right? And like I told you, the blue areas here you see are all the declared slums. They've been plotted to an accuracy of around 300 meters, give or take. The areas in red that you see are some of the most elite areas in Bangalore. Now, original hypothesis that was done in the early 1900s talked about how the SC/ST communities were obviously in majority in the slums, right? That's a no-brainer. And they would consider that it was considered that they live on the fringes, right? But when you look at it horizontally, like in a flat setup, you also see that it isn't just as simple as you know, a random design. You see that every red area has these slum areas right in the vicinity. Right now, this again goes back to our medieval setups where lowered caste communities were not allowed in the village, but they needed to be close enough so that they could serve you know, the various roles and jobs that they were allowed to participate in. And most of them were demeaning manual labor jobs, right? Which is the kind of the only education most people have in the Indian education system, that lowered caste communities used to carry night soil on their head, right? That isn't the case for all lowered caste communities, but it is their social condition that they have tried to represent through that activity, which everybody would sort of consider bad enough, right? I'm not going to get into that specifically now. The second slide is all the citations, caveats, and sources that I've used. Now, just to give you a little quick rundown on Bangalore for the ones who don't know, Bangalore is located in the heart of the Mysore Plateau, a region of the larger Deccan Plateau, at an average elevation of 920 meters, as I said. We have two unique topographies, the North Bengaluru Taluk and the South Bengaluru Taluk. The North Bengaluru Taluk ranges between 839 meters and 962 meters, right? Now, what I want you to notice is the middle of the taluk has a prominent ridge, which is called the Deccan Ridge, which I can actually show you in a better way on this map. Bear with me, guys. It's taking a second to load. So if you notice, this is the ridge, the red and white area. These are two ridges converging right in the middle of Bangalore. Now, if I go in, right, I'll go back. I'm going to stay on this map for a second now. Right. Let's start with the highest ground in Bangalore, and no surprises, it's named High Grounds. Right? Obviously, this area is home to some of the most elite people in the city. Even if you have a bunch of crores, you can't purchase property here because nobody's selling, and they would sell only to people of their choice. Now, if you look at this area, it's also adjoined by Vasant Nagar and Jai Mahal. And no surprises, the Bangalore Palace is also in the same vicinity. Now, if you let that load for a second. I'm going to go back to the data, but I'm trying to give you my premise here. I think there's somebody stealing your Wi-Fi, guys. Right. So if you see the makeup of these areas in white and red, they have some of the most prestigious locations in Bangalore. Obviously, the Indian Institute of Science, Sadashiv Nagar, around this part, High Grounds, Benson Town. Right. Now, if just by the name of, for the people who know Bangalore, you would know that these are elite areas, and I don't need to explain to you, or it wouldn't be any surprise to see that the caste composition of these areas is primarily Savarna upper caste, right? But as soon as I start zooming in, right, you see these blue areas. These are some of the lowest areas. Right now, I'm keeping High Grounds as a reference. Let's go back to the map plotted here. I'm sorry, guys, this is the first time I'm doing it online, so it might take a little longer than I'm prepared for. This is the same area as I was showing you. This is the static photo of that map that I was sharing. As you can see, Jai Mahal and High Grounds has their supply of lowered caste housings right next to it. Right now, there's a primary difference if you look at the border areas. Right, and anybody in city, anybody who knows anything about city architecture will tell you about the difference of developed areas having these beautiful grid-like lines. Right, but as soon as you start moving towards the slums, right, it's a free for all, and it looks like a bunch of goat paths just crisscrossing each other. Right. Now, when you're accessing the presentation, you'll also notice that there are these lines going all around, and this is what I wanted to get into. Right, the Jai Mahal area slums, right? These are the areas that serve Jai Mahal. As you can see in the map, the elevation heat map, it kind of perfectly aligns with the elevation dropping off, the placement of these slums, right? It'll be better if you guys go check out this presentation on your own at your convenience. Here, I'm just trying to tell you what my premise is, right? And as soon as the ground starts dropping off, the lanes start getting all swiggly. There's no symmetry, right? And these are also the places where most of the declared slums are placed. Now, these X's marked are the ones that I was able to track down. There are quite a few slums that were difficult to track down on maps. Maybe they'll have to be substantiated by more field visits. As you can see, the Jai Mahal slums, just the SC/ST population alone combines to about 30%. Any guesses on what their combined population in the state is? You could just shout it out. SC/STs combined in all of Karnataka don't exceed around 22%, right? But this is just the Jai Mahal slums, right? Let's go to our favorite area, Malleshwaram, which is like Bangalore for everybody from outside Bangalore. I'm sorry if I'm being too sassy. As you can see, the SC/ST population exceeds 73% within the slums. Right? That's more than their entire population, their national population. So it's no surprises that most slums are housing SC/ST populations primarily. And again, just to remind you, we are not counting OBCs yet. We aren't counting Christian Dalits, Muslim Dalits, etc. Right? Now, if we come down to the central Bangalore, what was the Pete area, as we used to call it, this was originally what many would say is the exception to my hypothesis, because this was an area that was traditionally occupied by dominant caste communities. But in the late 1890s, the plague hit, the bubonic plague. Obviously, everybody, I'm sure, heard about it. And this place had become extremely unsanitized and unfit for living. And they were all moved to guess where? Malleshwaram and Baswangudi, right? No surprises there, right? And Baswangudi is right here. It's not too far away. Again, look at the grid lines and look at the grid lines here. It's taking a second to load, right? And this is literally next door. So there is no specific reason for this to happen unless, of course, it was done intentionally. I'm sure land ownership also plays a role to some extent. But this is a feature of slums across Bangalore, right? This is the Uttarali. So Malleshwaram has some of the highest numbers of Malleshwaram slums have some of the highest SC/ST populations. At this point, I would like to bring you back to the census itself. If you notice on the left side, our folks in the census have not even cared to sort of hide the fact that these slums are there to serve a certain area. So you have Gandhinagar slums, Chikpet slums, Binipet, Chamrajpet, Shantinagar, Baswangudi, Yalanka, Jai Mahal, right? Malleshwaram. They all have their own slums. It was almost like as if it was a contingency created for these areas, right? Surprising that Shivajinagar only has 2 or 3 declared slums. Again, let me remind you, these are only the declared slums, right? Give me a second. I want to share some data around slums. Of course, this has been sourced from other research. As SCs and ST communities make up the bulk of the marginalized groups that are ghettoized within the lowest lying areas of the city, they are reduced to satellites to elite areas in their vicinity. Urban slum populations end up as auxiliaries. Only a few clans of SC/ST communities are reorganized, still and only for their professional abilities. Recognized. From the elite perspective, lower castes are seen as resources for manual scavenging, domestic work, labor, odd jobs, waste and carcass disposal, and other jobs that are called up to work in foul and unsafe settings, provided with tokenism in the place of safety equipment. We've all heard about the condition of Paurakarmikas in the city. That's another work group that is upwards of 90% lower caste communities. So that's another profession where you don't have meritorious, quote unquote, people losing out. It's mostly, I hope you get that, right? So the Paurakarmikas, for the people watching, are the domestic workers in Bangalore are given this very respectful name called Paurakarmikas. Sanitation workers, sorry. Sanitation workers, and they are the ones, most of them are living in the slums. So they ensure that the rest of the city is clean, whereas they are living in these places. So now let me come back to the sanitation question itself. Sorry. Right, no discussion about Bangalore would be complete without discussion on the Rajakaluves, obviously. The Rajakaluves are the network of sewage drains that go across, crisscrossing the city. Now, I hope you get the layout here. It's the areas in red are the elite areas, and these areas are perfectly insulating them. Now, if we actually get down to it and check where some of the biggest drainage areas in Bangalore are, there are three main exits for sewage in Bangalore. As you could see, one that goes off towards Mysore Road. Those who used to live in Bangalore earlier, before the Mysore Road actually was developed, would remember a massive foamy lake, river on your left side while going to Mysore. That is actually the natural drainage, the area that provides natural drainage from the city, right? As you can see, this is where it starts moving out. Right? And the Rajakaluves are again just placed on these areas itself. If I was in a better position, I would be able to point out. Okay, let me take you to a more familiar part of the city where I'm more familiar. This, of course, the Bengaluru Lake, the famous smoke on the water lake, which caught fire multiple times. There's no surprises, because if I move up, that massive drain below the Domlur flyover is what feeds the Bengaluru Lake, right? The Embassy Golf Links, as you're seeing, for the ones who are familiar with this area. This is Domlur, right? And if I follow this blue trail, takes me all the way to Alsur Lake, right? So the excess from Alsur Lake is what comes towards, there it is, Alsur Lake. So this entire swath of lower land, if you actually look at it, again, same thing. Look at here also you can see the street view, I'm sure. There's barely any proper grid lanes, right? This is as far as it will zoom in for now, right? And it's all like chaotic here. But as soon as you move to the green areas, our very own Indranagar, you suddenly have symmetric roads, straight lines again, right? Now, from the names of these areas itself, for the people in Bangalore would recognize that these are the biggest slums in Bangalore: Lakshmipura, Saraswatpuram, Ishwara Layout, Jogupalya, right? And the list goes on. If we could actually show where this actually goes, this comes into the Bengaluru Lake, which then drains into the Varturu Lake, right? Which then drains out towards Tamil Nadu, Hoskote, and then going down like that, right? The other big exit is, like I was saying, is on the Mysore Road side. The other big exit is lowland exit from the city is near Yalanka. Let me just get that for you. Right. And again, here, there are massive sewage lines that go out of the city. Now, I hope you've got the basic idea. It would have been easier to show on a slightly larger screen, but coming back to my presentation, if I compare, some of the lowest lying areas are obviously the Uttarhalli section, which is on West Bangalore. The thing is, if I zoom out of this, you won't be able to see the detailing. Maybe, yeah, that's the issue. right? This is some of the lowest lying areas. Right? Actually, you'd be better off. I'll be better off just speaking about it, and you guys can go check it out yourselves, because this could just take forever. If you see the placement of the slums, it just completely aligns. When I started this project, I wasn't expecting it to align this well. But when you go check it out for yourself and compare it with the altitude heat maps, it literally superimposes that most of the slums, if not all, are in some of the lowest lying areas. And the highest areas are completely, there are, I mean, if I have to be specific, there are no slums that go above the Bangalore average altitude, which is 920 meters, right? Whereas the rest of the areas exceed 960, 970 meters. Now you might say, okay, what difference does it make? It's 20, 30 meters, right? For those who are wondering, that's about 70 feet, 70, 80 feet. And now let me take you back to the time when it rains, right? All the Rajakaluves, now there is a lot of work going on. They're putting walls on the side. You might have noticed around the city, right? This is purely because all the rain that hits the ridge that I was talking about, which converges somewhere near high grounds, right? That the Rajakaluves just make all that sewage water move out from the center of the town towards the outsides. Now, if you track the sewage lines, and I'd request you to go back yourselves and do it, most, if not all, the slums are just bordering the sewage lines, right? If you go back to Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, they used to say people used to settle right next to the river. Right here, the slums are settled right next to the sewage lines, right? Which is why they have the maximum exposure to these places. And these places have been flooding since the early 80s. I remember from the earliest times that I started reading newspapers, Ejipura, Austin Town in Bangalore East, were always flooding, right? Today, it's become a massive issue. Why? Because finally, these areas have started, I mean, the highest areas are now saturated. So you're starting to move outside, and the big sort of complexes are moving away from the center of the city, right? And that's where we are seeing this kind of flooding. Also, let me remind you one thing I should have told you right at the top is the fact that Bangalore had close to 900 lakes in the beginning of the last century. That's the early 1900s. And over time, today we are left with less than 35. Right now, these lakes numbered close to 900 because a lot of the lakes I mean, Kempegowda is credited with to some degree with this, were integrated by underground aquifers, where obviously because we are 920 meters above the sea, we don't have any water source nearby. It's only groundwater. And back then, to harvest rainwater, these lakes were the only option that people had, right? So these lakes were also really cool because they would drain, one that would fill up would drain into the other lake, the nearby lake. And this sort of, I'm forgetting the technical term for it, this sort of water exchange sustained the entire city, right? Now, as the city kept expanding, you had to house people somewhere, because don't forget that these areas need the labor, right? They need those classes to exist, those castes to exist there, because nobody from their area will do these jobs that are completely essential, right? So let me just get you some data on that. 1 second. Right. So the condition of the slums, obviously, like I said, there are 2,804 declared slums in the state, out of which 597 are in Bangalore, out of which I have plotted the ones that exceed 1 acre. Right. So I haven't plotted the ones that are below an acre in size. Right. And as I said, there are CMC slums. There are also slums under the KSDB and the slum board. And the overall percentage of slum dwellers in the state is almost, this is according to the 2011 census that was released in 2015. So these are all numbers that are at least a decade old, right? But they obviously show you the trend. It has not reduced from them. That you can be really sure about. Now, let us quickly just go up on the numbers before I throw this open. You can read about the composition and my observations about these areas from people who live there. The communities that live there. Like I was saying, Malleshwaram has some of the highest. Malleshwaram slums have some of the highest density of SC/ST populations. Now, this is all based on data and it's all great. I kind of was just laboring the point because I'm not too sure about the people tuning in and the composition. And I was a little split between, because this presentation was originally meant to be given to a really small group where I would know where these people are from, so that I could explain in context. So right now I was just switching between somebody who would know Bangalore and who wouldn't, right? So let me just quickly take you back to some of the data sets and some of the more surprising and shocking things that you will see. If you haven't noticed them already, let me just highlight the SC/ST. Obviously, they give you the full population, male population, female, SC, ST, and others. Right? Let's just focus on SC/ST for now. Right? Malleshwaram is one of the areas where we have this complete data set. Right? Let me quickly scroll down to that. Right? We don't have any zeros. We have proper data. But if you start looking up, right? Jai Mahal, for instance, these slums apparently have a population of 1750, 900 male, 800 male, 0 SC, 0 ST, all others. Havadigar colony, 0 SC, 0 ST. Right? Full population is in others. Right? This is not even the shocking bit. Right? When I was presenting this, people are wondering how. Right? But if you come down, there are like blank spaces. They have not even cared to fill out the split here. I remember one line that stays with me from the presentation I made last time. There was a techie person, and from the behind, they just muttered, "Yaar, dash bhi nahi dala hai." Right? Because in Excel, it's like the cardinal rule that if there's a blank, you at least put a dash there, which has not even happened. Right? So many zeros. I hope you're noticing. Right? This Ambedkar Vrindavan garden has 0 huts, 0 population, 0. Right? And Vartur, which has actually the maximum number of slums. Vartur and Uttarali has the maximum number of slums. They haven't even cared to give male, female, forget SC/ST. Right? This extract is available on the Census of India website. It's also in the presentation. There's a link to that, so you can go check it out for yourself. In case you're suspecting that I've manipulated this spreadsheet, I wish I had that much talent, but as you can see, more and more blanks. Right? Those are the basic observations, and there are again, Rajajnagar slums, 74%. This is only because their data set is complete. Right? But if I put Uttarali slums, which is out here, though the data set is incomplete, 55% of the population is SC/ST. Right? Same thing with Vartur. Despite all those gaps you saw in Vartur, 49% is just SC/ST Hindu. Right? Now, this is I hope I haven't gone too fast, and I'm kind of getting nervous thinking that I've forgotten some of my key points, but I think that will come up during the discussion, and I've labored the point sufficiently. And just to repeat, in case somebody didn't get it, go to the lowest lying areas in Bangalore, go to the sewage lines, and right next to them, you will find the slums. Now, I think just as an exercise, if somebody here can just volunteer to check based on where you live, if there's a slum nearby, and what is the altitude of that place? Anyone wants to volunteer? Okay, where do you live? Okay. And have you seen a slum nearby?
Yeah.
To you? Oh, Rajakaluve, sorry, Mysore Road.
The drain also goes through that.
Yeah. Sorry, let me go to the heat map. Oh no. Where am I going? Naindalli. Ee kadena? Right.
Yeah.
Is that around about where you live?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is a
Yes. So that's the Rajakaluve. Yeah, great, actually, amazing. So now if we track this on the heat map. Okay, we are not going as far as Biddi. Right, the Vishabhavati was the one we used to see on Mysore Road on the way out. Right, and again, if you see the development right close to the Rajakaluve, it has no structure, it has no shape, right? And if I would have plotted the undeclared slums and the CMC slums, I'm sure you would have got something right next to this. Like I said, I've only plotted the declared slums, which are mostly within the city limits. This is kind of right on the edge. I mean, I mean, here in the heat map, you won't. I'm just trying to give you the lay of the land as such. In terms of right, ideally the slums there would come under the Uttarali section. Right, we're somewhere here. Anybody else who lives inside the city so that this works? Yeah, sure.
And Gorepalia Kempe, that's very low. Kempe, Agrahara,
Yeah.
Vichayanagar, the the Brahminical area.
Yeah.
Others are old mill workers.
Vijayanagar,
Rajajinagar, and then this side, west of it is Gorepalia and Kempe, Agrahara.
Right. So as you can see, Rajajinagar, right at the edge. Right. This is one of the lines. Right. Let me tell you, these gaps, many of them exist because I haven't plotted the other places. But as soon as the land starts dropping off, as you can see in the heat map on the right side, you start having slums that perfectly correspond to those areas.
Where would Gorepalia be?
Thing is,
that's correct.
yeah, Vijayanagar. Kamadhenu Hospital, is that close to where you were intending to go? Somewhere here?
Gorepalia is more towards Mysore. The Hosahalli metro station will be there.
But Gorepalia is more towards Mysore.
Yeah. But that's
And
next kilometers from.
but Vijayanagar, it's surprising. Vijayanagar is the most elite area. Next to that, there is what is called Moodalpalia. Moodalpalia is still on a higher slope.
Or we could check that out.
It comes down and there is slums. Not
Right.
Gorepalia. Gorepalia is this side. The interior of Vijayanagar. And Moodalpalia has a number of slums. But again, it's a very this thing because
So we have Vijayanagar here.
That is
Vijayanagar,
Vijayanagar.
then you have Chandra layout.
The orange is Vijayanagar.
Sorry, where am I going? You said near Vijayanagar?
Vijayanagar.
Yeah.
And
Go with Rajnagar? Which
you
area?
go to Vijayanagar and then that Chandra layout is there.
Okay.
And while you're going to Nagarbavi, from Vijayanagar to Nagarbavi,
Yeah.
you
South.
have very heightened slopes
Right.
where Moodalpalia slums are there. So those are really different topography totally,
Right.
because they came up there first,
Mhm.
and then they came up on high ground.
Right. Because nobody was claiming that
No
area.
one was wanting that area.
Right.
So there the water levels, everything is difficult.
Right.
But still there's a huge population of slums. But I have a understanding that it is not so many SCSTs.
Right.
I've been working on all
Yeah,
this
of course.
area, so that's why.
Right.
So there's not much of a so your theory or what you were saying
Hypothesis.
before,
Yeah.
so that elevation is not really generalized. You cannot generalize that.
Hmm.
You know that
It is actually generalized, like New Orleans,
Mhm.
whites stay in the higher ground. The floods
Okay.
only affected the African
Right.
Americans, right?
yeah, for a
And
large
even
part.
Singapore, the highest
Right.
grounds are lived by the rich Chinese.
Right.
Low grounds, that kind of.
No, I completely
It
I
affects
completely
the-
agree that there could be exceptions to this hypothesis that I'm making. But like I said, this is primarily with the declared slums that I've plotted. And I think if I try to labor the point here, it will just confuse people who are online. I welcome everybody to go check out the presentation, play around with it yourself, and actually go down to areas that you live and check it out for yourself. It might apply, it might not apply, but it strongly applies in the oldest slums in Bangalore with their relation to some of the most elite areas that we know, right? So if you can see, yeah, right. So
No, it is true also because in the initial stages, before the city was really developed,
Yeah.
and it was scattered, housing was scattered, these swamp areas, the swamp areas which were not livable, like I'll give you an example, Rajakaluve and JP Nagar. It was a total swamp area. So it was kind of, there were rocks and there's a swamp there. JP Nagar, okay. So when you had first Rajakaluve, they have been there for 30 years. So I've been working there, and it came up from a swampy area where it was filled up because housing was the need.
There were mangroves there.
No, it was a swampy. Ragi was also there, and it was very swampy, and Bundis were there. So that developed, and people had to live. People had to find a house to stay. So they developed it. While developing it, then they filled it up. They filled the mud up because we were fighting for a toilet there, and there were no toilets there. So then overnight, the slum lords had built that marshy area, converted that marshy area into housing, because housing is most profitable. Around that is the swanky JP Nagar now. So this is still, now it's not a slum, but it's a vertical slum.
yeah, you make a great point about these trying to revive or make these areas look livable. But like we saw with the example of the floods in Yalanka and Kadubisnali and those regions, though these places were completely paved and the apartments were like 12 stories, the water came up to almost the second floor. So that's the thing you can't with natural drainage, right? The water will find these places when there is excess water, right? Great example that fits what I was trying to say is actually in Koromangala, Neil Sandra, if you see this area, right? It completely lines up again in terms of the areas with slightly higher elevation, right? Whereas when you go to Ijipura, we know that it has a lot of slums. It's in some of the lowest lying areas, right? Which is why they have been having floods for 20, 30 years. Now, if you look at the larger area, a place like, let's say, Shivajinagar, right, which is always accused for bad maintenance, there's sewage, there's garbage. If you actually look at its position in relation to the areas around it, 1 second. Right, it's surrounded by some of the most elite areas, Cleveland Town, Millers Road, right, Cubbon Road, where we are right now. But if you look at where Shivajinagar is, right, and again, the thing I was telling about the roads perfectly lines up with the elevation. The things in the blues, you see, as soon as the elevation improves, you have slightly more symmetric lines, and the areas are named with cooler names. Right? And there are other hotspots, and I would welcome you to explore those on your own. I'm sure I've left out a few very important points that I wanted to make, because this was just a new experience in trying to do it online as well as offline. I think we'll start with questions here in the room, and people who are online can leave your questions on the chat box. The ones who are left, I'm sure a lot of people left because this was stretching on. Yeah, I'll leave it open to you guys now. Yeah, we should.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting presentation. Thank you. And my interest in this goes back to my own interest in the city, and a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. One is, have you compared your findings with the work of Professor Naveen Bharti, who had done something similar? I am.
Do you have another part?
Yeah, I have a part. Okay, the second part is goes to the point that Geeta mentioned about the aberrations. This I provide my own findings from research of documenting early settlements in the city, particularly pre-colonial. So I see perhaps maybe you could explore, or if you've already, maybe you could share. So the pre-colonial settlements were largely the documentation of those lie in the inscriptions, where the oldest settlements like Begur, Hebal. Hebal is the oldest settlement in the city, where we go back to 680 AD. So that's the, yeah, it's older. So it's older than the Pete by about 600 years. Yeah, so the Pete is a very recent construct in the larger timeline. If you look at human settlement, history of human settlements in and around Bangalore, I think that also largely overlap, because if you look at, study the inscriptions in and around Bangalore, and look at the caste names mentioned in the inscriptions, they go back all the way to say 680 AD onwards, right? Until the Cholas and the Vijayanagar period, you did not see the Brahminical names or the symbols in many of these inscriptions. So the inscription is evidence of a settlement. Largely, they talk about a lake or a temple around which there was a village. And now, what Geeta mentioned is the aberration. Many of those were also on high grounds, right? Not all of them were wiped out when the British came. Some of them survived as old settlements. And some early British literature, like say that of Benjamin Rice's biography, he talks about high grounds and why they chose high grounds as the point. He clearly says that we want to settle in the higher elevation to avoid the floods. So the British largely occupied these places to avoid being flooded. So it's no brainer. And then there's another data set that I tried to map while looking for inscription, the way that I went in, because there's no evidence of where it existed. So I started looking at where the water tanks are in Bangalore. Right? The water tanks are usually on the highest point in the locality, so that you use the benefit of elevation to supply water without having to. So the man-made water tanks, right? So in and no, the man-made BWSSB water tanks are usually at the highest point in that area, and the rest of the area is supplied by just the gravity effect, right? We don't have the pumping system like in US. So that's a good example in Basveshwanagar. I stay close to the water tank, and the slum is the lowest point from the water tank, which is close to Vrishbhavati, right? So that perhaps could add to your data set, saying mapping the water tanks and the lowest region around the water tank. This is something that I did for fun, but didn't really pursue. But maybe since you've already done that. So yeah, so coming back to, there was a lot of aside there. Yeah. So no, one was this Naveen Bharti's research, because I happened to listen to that. I don't know what has progressed since that research. And did you happen to rely on that? And is there any overlap? I don't know. That is the main question. And did you explore the pre-colonial history is what I wanted to say.
You want to take all questions at a time or
Yeah, actually, that is this.
anyone else? After this.
Basically, a question is like, this being part of many communities and seeing the development over the years or the evolution over the years. There have been declared slums, and it takes a long time to get them declared because the standards of declaration are very funny, that you have to live in garbage to be really declared a slum. You cannot have, proper setting, proper housing. So after they are declared, it doesn't mean that they will not be moved out. Okay, there is still processes that are taking place, like where you show this Vasant Nagar, no? Where the Ambedkar Bhavan is, where these places are, which are now today there. There was a huge Monday where all the slums from around the place that were evicted, demolished, were sent here and were put there and kept there for some time before they were taken out again from there and reshifted to again LR Nagar. Okay, so there is this kind of constant movement which is changing your topography that you're talking of. There's this constant eviction of slums which are also declared. And this LR Nagar is not LR Nagar. It's a combination. It's like America, where different countries came together and made it America. But there's no America. But the same way, LR Nagar is a combination of all the, evicted slums, thrown slums from various areas, like even from Jayanagar to, yeah. So that particular area, it was again a swampy lot. So there was no elevation there, nothing. So what I'm trying to say is that, and then you take the migrants and you take, say, SC, ST, okay? The initial people who came in, especially if you look at region also, those who came from Tamil Nadu and they're settled in the Tamilian areas, or mostly in the Tamilian areas, there are a larger number of SCs there. While those who have come from the interior of Karnataka, at least this is my experience, because we work with domestic workers, so we also see this caste, from the alignment from where they come from and all, and they stay in slums. So the entire communities that are more of Tamil population, and in the Rajakaluve slum, there's a Tamil population stays in this corner, the Telugu population stays in that corner, and the Kannadic. So there by itself, the kind of SC, SCST layout, the formations. So what I'm trying to say is that, do we take all this into account? Then the whole question of course, the migrants are not in declared slums. The new that is on the outskirts of Tubrali and all, where the large number of Bengali Muslims are there. So do we take into account, when you're talking about elevation, when they're talking about topography, do we take into account also the caste, the language groups, the certain areas are kept underdeveloped, like around Shivaji Nagar, kept underdeveloped because of religious, because of minorities, because of a large population of minorities staying there. So there is all these other political dynamics that have to be taken into consideration when they're talking about a city. If in the city plan, there is no mention of, there's only mention of residential spots, places, earmarked. There's no mention that these residential places are also comprising of people who live in slums. So, where do you really kind of sift this?
Yes. Just a request, the people online also, your questions sharp and have it.
Yeah, so hi, thank you for this very interesting presentation. I get the point that you're making, that there's an overlap between socioeconomic vulnerability and the vulnerability due to environment and geographic factors. And I really like the point that you made, where you showed that slums are sort of on the fringes of these upper caste areas, sort of reflecting the sort of setup in a village. So I was wondering, since this is supposed to be a planned mega city, did you come across any sort of laws or practices in planning that have sort of led to this situation where not only are they just springing up on the fringes of these elite areas, but also in the low-lying areas, like what has led to this situation in a sort of a planned city? Like what are the systemic factors in planning bylaws, development plans that are leading to this? And the second, so this is a bit of a history, but the second question is a bit about the future, that now Bangalore is growing, right, in this electronic city, and towards the east and towards the south, I guess. So is it a pattern that is also being repeated in these areas? Because this was still like city that was already there before the electronic boom, I think. I'm not very familiar with the history of the city, but is it like also repeating in the areas that are growing? Yeah, these two questions. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for this very interesting presentation. Question tagging on to the earlier question. In the data set, could you also add, I mean, there's something I'm working on, infrastructure like hopcoms, which are, cooperative structures, parks, my just experiential, I mean, I don't know about theoretically, but I see they are only in dominant caste areas. Places like Agrahara don't have these facilities at all. Parks, hopcoms, Nandini, milk shops. So could that be added on? I mean, that's just my personal, but then seen as a data set. So that, yeah, sorry.
So this is because you brought up the example of Shivaji Nagar, right? And like also like when my office used to be in Cooktown, I used to pass by that Fraser Town and Mosque Road area where very clearly beside a sewer, you see like a slum right there. And please prove me wrong, but is there also the aspect of religion on this, where certain religions were, communities were, maybe not forced or encouraged, or whatever word you want to choose, to settle down?
Hi, I was wondering what is the nature of the land ownership in declared slums versus undeclared slums? And you also mentioned slum lords, right? Are they present in both declared and undeclared slums? And how is the property sort of devolving in both these areas? Thank you.
Hi, thanks for this really interesting presentation. I was wondering how other features of the built environment, like say railway tracks or maybe even flyovers, follow or sort of map on to the kind of topographic changes that you're, sort of differences that you're talking about.
You want to take these answers before we go for another round? So many.
Okay. Firstly, I think response to the IIM research, I think it was a very comprehensive research study that came up with also came up with a very interesting interactive map where you could actually see the same data set projected onto these areas. But like I was telling you earlier, correct me if I'm wrong, I did not see the elevation element in that. And I actually, the first time, to be very honest, I'm embarrassed. I should have done that reading. The first time I heard about this was at my BIC presentation for this was Smarter Digital Realities, where somebody brought up the same point. And since then, I've seen, gone through it, just given it a glance. And I'd love to see, common areas and areas like the kind of analysis that you said from a older historic perspective. I was hoping to get into the older census questions, right? That's something if I can bring up quickly. The questions in the census itself, right, have changed over time. As all of you know, they happen once in every 10 years. The first one was in 1930, right? It always has the basic metadata. If you could just hold this.
That's the only time the caste census was done, right? 1930.
Done and released, yes. I mean, yeah.
After that, there's been no caste census.
Right. So I wish I could pull this up. I'm not able to. There's a little bit of I'd share that link on the chat. It basically lists, the Census of India website lists all the questions. And the 1930 had, I think, close to 25 questions that were asked in each household. And that narrowed down, kept narrowing to, I think, somewhere in 91, it was just about 16 questions. And then back to 2011, it was 27 questions again, with questions talking about what sort of dwelling it is, right? If a person is an SC/ST, belong to the ST/SC group, what profession they are in what, how often, how many days a year they work, have they been employed in the last 1 year or so. So these are the micro data which are given within the census. So I was hoping to go back and probably check, but your suggestion of looking at these historic amenities that were given and the layout around that would be really interesting to check that out. Coming to the next question about if the religious and the lingual groups actually, if that makes a difference. I think I would also like to raise at this point that a majority of people who are Muslim and Christian had originally converted from lower caste communities. So I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, that people who speak a particular language or are belong to a particular religion would then be placed in these areas. In terms of the new ghettos that are coming up, you need to remember, in my analysis, the difference between Bangalore and a lot of other cities is a lot of other cities are linear. So there is space to grow in a direction going out from the city. Whereas Bangalore has started doing that only very recently. So people had to make do, the town planners, etc., the administration had to make do with the land that was available within. And the only land that was this kind of deemed land that would have flooded 10 years, 15 years ago. People would have forgotten, and now it's being used as a playground, which would then be converted into a slum settlement, right? And if you go into the data, the first round of slums that were declared, and Geeta ma'am, I back this up, that was somewhere in the early 80s only, right? So the earliest was like 77 or something that slums start getting declared. Now, remember that the declared slum could be just one small piece within a much larger, what we would call a slum area. So if you look at the things I've plotted are the only ones, the ones that I could track down. Right, the slum areas sometimes expand beyond that as well. So I hope I've answered that question on if it has an impact on language and religion. Also, for those who don't know, Bangalore had those two distinct parts, which is North-South Bangalore was traditionally Kannadiga, local population, and the big division on the east, which was actually the one settled by the British, like our friend was saying earlier, has its own sort of history and culture. But what is common between the two is this elevation thing that I found. Right. So I don't know if I completely answer that question, but I'm going to try and move to the next one. You mentioned about the newer areas springing up. Now, I don't know if they're just springing up, because like I said, the three categories, declared, undeclared, CMC, are the ones that we know about. Rather, the government has cared to go and look for these places. But you would see in a lot of places across the country, land that is unclaimed is usually settled by people who are from lowered caste communities. So it would be very interesting to actually explore that aspect that you're talking about. But I wouldn't say that these places have just sprung up. These were just places there where they would have least resistance to settle. Right. And then over time, it's not actually like an egg and chicken story that the government put all these slums where they are. The area came up and they were declared so that they have certain basic benefits of a PHC, of a school, of certain other amenities that you have to give to a declared slum. Right. So sorry, ma'am?
And for political reasons, every election they will do that.
And for political reasons, as they say. Right. So I hope that answers that question. The next thing, the availability of public amenities in the slums. I think the previous answer answered that as well. You just have to walk into one of these places and you'll see a PHC with half a door open is the only amenity that you get there. And if you ask the locals, they'll say, forget putting a park here, or, just make more toilets for us. So they don't want your parks and your Nandini parlors and your hopcoms, etc. They would rather, I think, I hope I'm not speaking for them out of turn, but they would rather, the spaces are so tightly packed, and you could zoom into just a regular Google map. You don't have to go to my presentation as well. You see the tightly packed nature of these places. There is no place to make these amenities. So you have to make it at the edge of the area or in a place in the dominant caste area, which is nearby, where these people have to then go there and access these. amenities. So to answer your question in short, no, I think there is no place to give these amenities. I can only imagine where they would do it, or they will have to buy the land back. I don't know really, right? And in terms of ownership, I think the question that came was part of the same question that you asked. No, that was somebody else. Sorry. There was a question about Shivaji Nagar. You were saying, could you? Yeah, I answered that. The nature of land ownership in the slums, like I said, there are various owners. And I haven't compared actually who owns the biggest share. I'm guessing it's the government, it's the KIDB, the slum board and the government themselves. But there is a sizable amount of private ownership on these slums, and these go on for generations. Right? You could oftentimes compare it to back the zamindari system, where a family would just be indebted and therefore continue to till the land at at a loser's wage, at a losing wage, where they are literally in debt for generations to come. In this case, I think that kind of falls in place because these slums that most people are paying rent. These are not quarters or just spaces given to them to live rent free. Right? It's probably only in the government slums that the land has been allotted to the person who's staying there. Right, ma'am? So, right. So they are not fully owned on paper and can be very easily disputed by an Adani or an Ambani or you and me. So, does that answer your question?
But ultimately it's design.
Yeah.
It's a design. You said there's no space for parks.
Yeah.
It was a design that there was a park, the space was already allotted before the plots. For example, the design that in sense, 30 by 40 foot is a it costs around 2.5 crores. Whereas say typically in Kerala, a home worker would typically have a house which is at least 2,000 to 3,000 square foot. And here a middle class, upper middle class person has a house which is on 1,000 square. It's a design.
Yeah.
It's not that you don't want a park, or obviously everyone wants a park.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't say you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's such a lot to do with land, ownership of land. And
It's the design of
Yeah, somebody was mentioning, I think, yeah, I think the next question was about railway tracks and other sort of unfavorable locations and them having slums next to them. Yeah, the way they cut it up, right? And yeah, that's another point, actually. You go across the railway lines as well. You have slums bordering them as well, right? So if you go close to the cemeteries in Bangalore, Kalpalli in Bangalore East is one of the largest cemeteries anywhere in South India. And in all sides, it has slums. And then just another kilometer away is Benson Town, Coxtown, Frasertown, right? The buffer between these two, the biggest cemetery and the Coxtown, Benson Town is Bharat Nagar and those slums in East Bangalore, right? Any more questions from the crowd? Yeah, there is also military land in a lot of places. But again, if you look at most of the military installations, this is a thumb rule that they follow across India, is that it will be a slightly elevated location anyway. So today we have the advantage of looking at this heat map, which I don't know why is right. But back in the day, people were very well aware of it in a localized setting. They didn't need these maps to figure which is the high ground, which is the low ground. Today, we are able to see it in a macro sense because of this free resource that a Japanese developer created. And because I was running behind on my submission and I just needed an interactive platform, and I luckily happened to chance upon this place, which like I said, it threw up more cases that fit my hypothesis than I expected, honestly. And yes, definitely there are exceptions to that. Right? Any more questions from me? Yeah, please.
It's on your chat.
Yeah. 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 Based on the declared slums and their vicinity. Sorry? No, I Google mapped that. Yeah, I just saw the name and then place the.
9 polygons.
Yeah, so that's the general area. Like I said, the polygons are mapped not to the data set, but to the vicinity where there are other undeclared, uncategorized slums. But that's the larger vicinity.
That you did it manually.
Yeah, on Google Earth. That's my actually presentation. Nothing else I've done. Yeah. Yeah, please.
They know the questions. We can directly answer. People know. 1 second. Thanks. We're just taking questions from the Zoom chat box now. What does it mean for a slum to be owned by BBMP? It's different coming under it within the ward. I'm not sure what owning a slum area means. Okay. Should I say all of it or you want to do one by one?
Actually, I can read it now, so I'll answer it. Right. To answer that, who owns it? For example, who owns the Majestic bus stand? Right. It is land that is owned by the government. Who owns Vidhan Sabha's land? The government owns it. So if the BBMP, I mean, there are certain lands that come under BBMP, the others that go under CMC. These are administrative units. And anyway, if I'm not wrong, correct me if any piece of property is on a 90-year lease from the government. Nobody actually just owns. So probably if you own land in anywhere in India, it's on a 90-year lease, which is then renewed based on whatever, the number of years and how much expansion there has been, blah, 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 market rates, etc. So I hope I've answered that question about who owns a slum. The private owners are basically former landlords who probably would have been impacted by urban land sealing and reduced down to 5 acres. And they turned that, instead of having 5 big bungalows there, you can have 500 hutments and collect rent from those people for generation after generation. So it is also one of the, economic activities for people with those kind of lands that probably nobody else would access, right? Did you mention the source of the data set? Yes, we'll share the link on the second slide is all my data set sources.
You just tell everyone to send their email ID. We'll email everyone.
Yes, okay.
Because the the recording of the session can also be.
Right, in the meantime, let me just quickly. Yeah, finally got it. Let me just, I'm going to leave the. This is a link to the presentation, so you can guys go check it out. Oh. No,
Yeah, someone already posted it in the chat.
oh, amazing. Thank you. You're an angel. Okay, I'm scrolling up. Could you put the links to the maps? These maps. Okay, yeah, sorry.
The mic.
Is there any way to access my entire research? Yes, please go to Google Earth. And there's intentionally, I've kept some of the points that I've made out of the presentation because it just gets too dense. Yeah, and I don't want people to steal my works. I'm kidding. I'm just curious about, no, can I go one by one? I'm just curious about the areas that are present centers of power, like the state and central institutions, and also the military occupied areas. I think I answered that they are in the most favorable locations, and you can go check out this map. The link to this interactive map is inside the presentation, so you can just go check out explore the city on your own. It was an interesting presentation. Thank you. The new entrance in the infrastructure dry waste collection center, it's supposed to be neighborhood process center. There is huge resistance certain area than other. It's also linked to higher income and upper caste areas. Has anyone any analysis on this? Nalini, I think I'll get back to you with a more detailed answer. So when I understand your question better, but definitely please reach out. I'm going to leave my email here. We can get in touch and I can answer your questions. Could you please throw some light on the slum areas adjoining right next to the military army land? Example, right next to MEG, which goes towards Coxtown, Jivanali. I think I answered that as well. Wow, I have like superpowers. How did I know? I should stay serious. Which one?
Create cross-section of perhaps standard data set with focal high ground elite areas with surrounding low ground non-elite areas. Is there sufficient data to build something like this to influence urban planning?
Yeah, I'd like to understand that question about the cross sections better. Please get in touch. My email will be shared here. And I'm sure we can figure out ways to do that. And I'm sure there are data sets out there that I have not found. I think of it as how these power centers are in a way accessible or partially made invisible for the communities in the slums. Yeah. Right. I think, have you answered everything there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Super interesting. Am I audible? Yeah, okay. Sorry. So you were talking about how slum areas are, not planned, they're not in grids, etc., and they're also densely packed. And you also have the data for the population in these communities. Were you able to overlap or superimpose the data of density of population and elevation? And if you did, then are there any insights or any hypotheses that you were able to develop?
That would also actually be a very interesting way to look at it. Like I said in the presentation, the size of each slum is given. So that would totally be possible. And yeah, the scope of this presentation is definitely to keep expanding. As you can see, there are a lot of gaps. There are a lot of new things that can be brought into this. And please feel free to get in touch so that we can do this. I'm already in conversations with people in trying to improve this. But I did this alone, and I had to go through data for about, as I said, 1,400 slums in the city, 1,400 plus slums, and then plot it based on that. And Google Earth has its limitations. This is called Google Earth Projects. It's an educational tool, actually. You can go check it out, and it has its limitations in terms of representation. Yes, I would have liked it to be more three-dimensional. But I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. There's a professional version of Google Earth where apparently you can do that.
Related to, if there are laws that are causing these systemic problems as well, and
I'm not sure about that. To be honest, I should know. I need to explore those things. But more than laws, I think caste is defined by norms, which aren't written anywhere, which people claim to understand, but then say, no, it's confusing. It doesn't happen in my house, doesn't happen in my family. So you don't really need rules, right? And for the benefit of the people listening, the difference between rules and norms are that norms just are given to us by the previous generation, and laws are actually put on paper, and you can't put these things into laws, I would assume, but I won't be surprised if they have laws that restrict these things, and someone with better scholarship could answer that question. But in my opinion, I think the success of caste systems are that successive generations say that, hey, wait, that's a thing of the past. Hey, wait, that doesn't work in cities. Hey, wait, South India mein utna nahi hai jitna UP, MP, Rajasthan mein hai, which is not true, because you're arguing the degree of wetness of water, right? And caste, like water, pervades the entire part of South Asia. Let's not just say it's India, right? Caste pervades religion. You have upper caste Muslims and lower caste Muslims. You have Brahmin Christians and untouchable Christians. The great example in Bangalore itself, and this was part of a sociology class at St. Joseph's, the St. Patrick's Church, part of the Catholic club, coolest part of town, is part of the same diocese as Sacred Heart Church, which is down the road from there. And Sacred Heart Church is for lower caste converts, Indian Christians, as they decently call it, whereas St. Patrick's is for Anglo-Indians and upper caste convert Christians, right? This is the example with Christianity. With Islam, you have the, Sayyids, Ashrafs, who are at the top of the food chain, right? And I'm not aware of the degree of untouchability that's practiced in both these religions, but it is pretty apparent, in terms of who ends up in leadership positions within these groups. My brother had actually done a story on the number of upper caste convert people who became priests and rectors and deans and so on and so forth, exceeded 85%, whereas the Church of South India's number, the amount of low caste converts into CSI are actually 80%, and they probably are less than 5 to 10% in the leadership roles. Right. Today we're having the same argument and the same discussion, I would say, in the corporate world. This is another space where they say, no, caste doesn't exist. Right. But it's pretty apparent. Right. And most of the people who work at these, MNCs, corporate companies, belong to a certain social group. Right. All you need to do is just go pull out who are the top 10 CEOs and their VPs and so on and so forth. And I would be really surprised to see somebody who's a non-Savarna, right, a non-upper caste person there. So yeah, I think I hope I've not missed anything. Yeah, you.
By design, or actual presentation, because if it wasn't then.
Can you start? Okay. I mean,
No, just one second.
I was just responding to your question that I do think the law is facilitating this, and it is by design. Otherwise, they would have had the opportunity to own the land. The fact that they are being dispossessed and they continue to sort of live in this limbo, I think it is by design. And the fact that the state can sort of manipulate and evict them whenever they want and not give them the right over the land, law, I think is facilitating that in a way. Yeah.
No, just one curiosity and one comment. Yeah, I'm his brother. Yeah, we stay in the same house. My parents. Yeah. We also same. No, the thing is, the curiosity is if we could get our hands on older maps, not we like Sumanto, like because the city was a village once, and the village architecture we know has Uru and Keri, or in Tamil they say Uru Cheri. Okay, so how has the city overlaid on the village? So are the old Cheris today the new slums? Are the old Uru today the Baswangudi Malaysian? That is one. If we can get older maps for comparison, that's one thing. And secondly, when we talk about is this design by default, is it by default or by design? I think one thing to be taken that could be taken into consideration is that architecture and everything in the Sanskritizing, Brahminizing process is informed by the Brahmin's fear of pollution, right? The purity pollution thing, that my drain water will go down to you, your drain water will not come to me. So that gradient of how the water flows and low-lying areas and the correspondence between that is, I think, was something, that's the comment part. Yeah, that's all.
Thanks. I guess there's no happy ending to this because it's I know that was a stupid line. I got it from that expression. But yeah, like I said, the primary motivation behind this was to give some sort of a loose data set, because most people, when you talk to them about caste, they said, hey, based on what? This is your opinion, right? So that was my primary provocation to work on something like this. So please, next time you're in a conversation where casteist people are like hounding you for data, this is one of the resources you can use. Just go down to the census data, show them how it's distributed, show them the ratio and the degree to which these lower castes are ghettoized within these areas. And I think at this point, thank yous are in order. First and foremost, thank you, ALF, and for giving me this opportunity. This project's actually been sitting on ice, so this is a reason for me to actually pick it up again. Second, for everybody that came down here, it's very nice of you. I'm sure you heard from people and people told you about this, and some influential people put it up on Twitter and all. and the thing just blew up. Thank you for everyone online who's joined in. And I hope I didn't drag on and make too many stupid jokes. Also, yeah, primarily I would like to thank my brother because he was one of my first, I mean, my parents always pretended, no, you know, there's, you know, it's not that bad types. I don't blame them for it because I would have been even more depressed earlier in my life. But Sudipto has been responsible for entire awakening towards these issues. And I would like to thank him for that. I would like to thank my folks for being open-minded and coming all the way here and keeping us curious. And I think that's the greatest thing I've picked up from them. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for coming, battling Bangalore traffic and getting here. And if anything else, please get in touch. And thank you, everybody. Droning on. Thank you. Thank you. Please follow me on Instagram.
Thanks so much, Sumanto, for that very incisive presentation. And I also think it's important to look at look at what you're leaving us with, which is the fact that it is very personal. Caste is very personal, and the kind of political conversations we have in our own houses and in places where we live and reflecting on that is something that at least I'm taking away from this, right? It's something you use for advocacy within your own people who say that caste doesn't exist. And I think that, and this is very helpful for that. And to those who are not convinced, this offers a fantastic image of why you should look at caste a lot more seriously. And thank you everybody for coming in here today. And thank you for also making this a very personal conversation for all of us. And please, if any one of you is not there on the mailing list till now, please sign up on the mailing list. And yeah, that's about it. You can follow us and on Instagram, Facebook, and all of that. We clean our room.
More questions.
Yeah. We also have a few publications from our recent research. A lot of these books are kept out there in the big stuff. If you feel like donating anything, please donate over here. And we try to do this every Friday, and that's why please add your email ID so you can receive updates on the event. Thank you. Thank you so much.